technical problem here on a Friday afternoon. Thank you all for joining us so late on a Friday, especially given the rough week we've had, a rough 2 weeks with the confirmation, which have not been nearly as rough as we thought. Things are going really well for Barrett. We're really excited. So thank you for joining the Committee for Justice's webinar today on the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett. We'll take a look at the progress and the progress and the look ahead of what's going to be happening over the next couple of days, including on Monday and possibly into Tuesday. Hopefully we'll be able to confirm early next week. But first, to introduce the speakers in the order in which they will be speaking. Curt Levey is president of the Committee for Justice. He has expertise in constitutional law, civil rights, the federal judiciary, and intellectual property, and co-authored a Supreme Court amicus brief in Google versus Oracle copyright case this term. After graduating Harvard Law School with honors in clerking for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, Mr. Levey served as Director of Legal and Public Affairs at the Center of Individual Rights, after which he headed the Title IX Policy Group at the Department of Education Office for Civil Rights. Before attending law school, Mr. Levey earned undergraduate and graduate degrees in computer science from Brown University. Next, we have Carrie Severino. Carrie Kimball Severino, a law clerk for Justice Clarence Thomas in 2007 through 2008, is president of the Judicial Crisis Network and co-author of the best-selling book, Justice on Trial, The Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Court. An expert on the confirmation process, Mrs. Severino has been extensively quoted in the media and regularly appears on television. During the Kavanaugh confirmation, she logged 104 TV appearances, in addition to doing extensive radio and print media. Severino writes and speaks on a wide range of issues, including the constitutional limits on government, the federal nomination process, and state judicial selection. She has testified before Congress on constitutional questions and briefed senators on judicial nominations and regularly files briefs. She also clerked for Judge Santel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit and is a graduate of Harvard Law School, Duke University, and Michigan State University. Michael Thielen has served as Republican National Lawyers Association's executive director since 2000. He graduated from the University of California, Los Angeles, and Pepperdine School of Law. Michael worked previously for the Republican National Committee, RNC, and Judicial Watch. He has been actively involved in the judicial confirmation fight since 2001. He has been quoted in a wide range of conservative publications, including the Wall Street Journal and Washington Times. He is a frequent contributor to the Daily Caller, the RNLA's Twitter, blog, and Facebook account primarily focused on judges and election law. First, a few housekeeping notes. So we're going to have each of the speakers speak, and then we're going to have a little bit of a discussion between myself and the three speakers. And we're going to have Q&A at the end. For Q&A, if you could please send me your questions through the Q&A box. If you see the bottom bar of the screen, the little thing that says Q&A, you can send me a question at any point throughout the panel. Feel free to send them, earlier than the Q&A process, and that way I can kind of have them lined up and integrate the questions in later. It's a lot easier than stopping the panel and having people ask questions. So if you could please use that method of sending questions, that would be really great. And with that, Curt, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Let me start by noting that today is the 33rd anniversary of Judge Robert Bork's defeat by the Senate back in 1987, after the highly politicized hearings conducted by none other than Joe Biden. So the anniversary is notable not just to historians, but to anyone following the current election and to anyone who follows judicial fights. What happened with Bork and then a few years later with Thomas, again, also chaired by Biden, is really the beginning of the politicization of the nomination process, and at least on the part of the Democrats, the use of the politics of personal destruction. It's all culminated in the use of the judicial filibuster, and then I guess the low point was Kavanaugh 2 years ago. If you want to learn more about that low point, Carrie and her colleague Molly have a great book on it. And I always think of the Bork hearings and defeat when Biden mentions being the guy who can end divisiveness in the nation, because not only does pretty much everyone agree that the politicization of judicial nominations began with Bork, but I've heard a number of historians say they think the general divisiveness and nastiness of our political debate. So it is sort of ironic that Biden wants to end that now, 33 years later. Let me start with a few things that struck me about the hearings. It was hard to miss the Democrats' obsession with Obamacare, the ACA. Every single Democrat talked about it. I'm sure it was just a coincidence that every Democrat just happened to have someone that they met who was going to die or close to die if Coney Barrett became a justice and struck down the ACA. And then, of course, it continued. The Democrats didn't show up for the vote in committee, but their cutouts of people who were affected by the ACA did show up. So that really was their biggest obsession. And supposedly that strategy was motivated by the fact that the Democrats feel they won the House in 2018 because of the ACA, because of scaring people about the ACA. So, I can't tell you how many, I think probably every Democrat, but certainly close to every Democrat claimed that Trump picked Barrett because he could count on her to strike down the ACA. Now, anyone who's been following Barrett's rise over the last few years as a someday likely nominee knows that's the last thing in the world. I mean, basically, she first became well known to a lot of conservatives because of the way Feinstein and Durbin attacked her Catholicism. And people have thought of her as pro-life, and she was unabashed about that. But in all the discussions that I've had with people about why they want Barrett, I have never heard anyone say because she's the right person to strike down the ACA. So if that's Trump's secret reason, he's kept it secret from every one of his advisors. Now, of course, this whole obsession with the ACA is kind of silly because we don't know if the court's going to strike down the individual mandate, which doesn't really mean much now that the tax is gone. But the odds that they would strike it down and then say it can't be severed from the rest of Obamacare and strike down all of Obamacare is tiny. Anyone who's worried about that is probably also worried about monsters in their closet. I think it's also worth noting that the ACA was struck down by the lower court, by the Fifth Circuit. So if Barrett wasn't on the court and you had a 4-4 split, it would remain struck down by the Fifth Circuit. I guess it would depend exactly what was severed and what wasn't severed on remand. But the Fifth Circuit opinion was certainly more pro striking down the entire statute than the Supreme Court would be. In any case, we'll see if the ACA strategy works. When election day comes, I guess it's hard to know. Their other obsessions were, of course, Roe. That's maybe a little more understandable, not because I think Barrett will strike down Roe or that there's 5 votes on the court to do it, but just because she is pro-life, and that is that sort of their well, they've been predicting that every nominee since O'Connor would strike down Roe, so I guess we can't be surprised about that. And they also were pretty paranoid about any cases that are going to come to the Supreme Court after the election. Contests over mail-in ballots or other election issues. They seem pretty convinced that Barrett would be beholden to Trump because he appointed her. First, let me say on Roe, I thought she handled it very well. There's always the issue of, is Roe super precedent, i.e. precedent that you better not ever overturn. And sometimes nominees fumble with that because you don't want to say something like Brown v. Board isn't super precedent, but you don't want to say that Roe is, since it's still being contested. And she handled it very well. She pointed to a study that said there's about 5 cases that are super precedent in the sense that nobody can test them. So there'd be nobody to challenge them, even if there was a Supreme Court justice who wanted to strike them down. And I won't go through the whole list, but Brown was one, Marbury v. Madison was another. And I thought that was a very effective way of handling it. I liked that handling of it better than the way previous nominees had to fumble just because there really is no legal definition to super precedent. And as for her being beholden to Trump, well, they want her that, you could make that argument about every justice was appointed by some president. And of course, they want her to recuse herself from election cases, and they want to recuse herself from they want her to recuse herself from the ACA case because she once wrote about it. But again, if that was the rule, then justices would be recusing themselves all the time, because many of them have written about things before they were on the court, and they were, as I say, they were all appointed by president. So the other thing I think that struck me the most is just how smoothly it went. And maybe that's because I had predicted a couple of years ago that when Ginsburg passed away or retired, we'd see the most vicious confirmation fight ever. I looked at what happened with Kavanaugh, where he was replacing a GOP appointee, and I thought, try to replace a liberal justice, especially a liberal icon like Ginsburg, and you're going to have, instead of people, tying themselves to the Supreme Court doors, you're going to have them setting themselves on fire. And that didn't happen. And, I don't think I'm naive about these things, so I don't say it lightly. I mean, I think this is the 9th Supreme Court nomination I've been involved with, if you count Garland and Myers. And so that, was saying a lot, saying this would be the most vicious. But I was wrong. I was 100% wrong. It was probably went as smoothly as Roberts and Gorsuch did. Now, of course, she has not been confirmed yet, so I shouldn't jinx anything, but I don't expect any last minute surprises. I think those would have happened already. And if there are any, they'll be more designed to, score points with regard to the election or influence her vote on the ACA or election cases, not to stop her. The Democrats, last ploy was to boycott the vote. That accomplished absolutely nothing other than getting FaceTime for their cutouts. All it did was allow history to record that it was a unanimous vote. So I think it's interesting to ask why it went so smoothly, surprisingly. Part of it is just you had a great nominee, brilliant nominee, winning personality. But I think there's more to it. It also helped that the public, because of COVID, was not allowed in the hearings or even the building. If you remember with Kavanaugh, we had handmaidens in the hall and screamers in the hearing room. And this time, like I said, they had to stay outside. And then, it's sort of ironic that we all were worried. I know amongst ourselves, we would talk about, if Ginsburg retires or dies right before the election, how much time do you think you'd need to be able to replace her? And it turned out that the amount of time, the short amount of time worked to our favor, I think, because it came so close to the election that the Democrats were focused on winning the election, such as focusing on the ACA rather than defeating Barrett. And if they had any inclination to attack Barrett, again, about her Catholicism or, why does she have a career and 7 kids at the same time? They certainly were not going to do that right a few weeks before the election, especially because there's the perception that the way they treated Kavanaugh cost them some Senate seats 2 years ago. So, I did mention her Catholicism, and I did mention that Durbin and Feinstein attacked her about it. And I think that also made them gun shy, because that did not go well 3 years ago. And not only did the election help, but I think the speed helped. It turns out you don't need much more than a month to confirm a Supreme Court justice. And all that extra time just makes extra time for mischief and, uncovering, uncorroborated charges of God knows what. Also key was that the Republicans came together very quickly on this. I was impressed by McConnell. Much like with Garland, within a few hours, where he said, we're gonna keep this seat open. Within a few hours, he said, we're gonna vote on Trump's nominee if he sends one up. And I think that helped a lot to unify Republicans. I think once Romney came around, the things were pretty much all set. We also have to give credit to the president. I don't know that other Republican presidents would have done this. Some would have said, "Oh, it doesn't look good to nominate someone this close to the election or so soon after Ginsburg passed away." But Trump, doesn't worry about political correctness, as we know. I guess the bad news, in some sense, is that it might have gone very differently if this was, 6 months earlier. So I'm not sure what lessons can be learned for future nomination fights that don't happen right before an election, although the last two did. I was also wrong in that I thought there'd be more skirmishing about Barrett and court packing last night at the debate, and I guess that played itself out in the first debate. Now, Biden, probably the most interesting thing about that is Biden tried to preempt that awkward court packing question where he has to say, I can't answer it, or I'll answer it after the election, by leaking a 60 Minutes interview, which is supposed to come out Sunday, in which he proposes that he will appoint a commission to look at court reform. Now that's just really another way of kicking the can past the election, but it's an artful way of doing it. But again, we all know what commissions accomplish, very little. I'll just point out that some of the things that Biden says in that 60 Minutes interview are scary. He says he wants to reform the court system. So not just the Supreme Court, but the entire court system. And he says he wants to study a number of alternatives that go way beyond court packing. So, this might be, it was already bad enough that the Democrats were going to get revenge for Trump's 3 Supreme Court nominees by packing the court, but they may do a lot more than that. And that may be the biggest news that comes out of all of that. I'll stop there.
Okay, and with that, we'll turn the floor over to Carrie.
All right, thanks so much. So trying to figure out all of the topics that Curt wasn't able to cover here. First of all, I will note, he noted it was the anniversary of Bork's, the failed Bork nomination. I will point out it's also the anniversary of Justice Thomas's first official day on the bench. He was sworn in on October 23rd, 1991. So a happier anniversary to celebrate. And I think one that this is now almost 30 years in the bench for Justice Thomas. I think it's something to celebrate that we didn't see, as Curt said, another Thomas Kavanaugh style hearing here. Is something really to be grateful for, for Amy Coney Barrett's sake, for the whole country's sake. I think a lot of us would be going through PTSD if we had to go back and do another Kavanaugh style confirmation again. So I think that's really good on so many different fronts. I'll point, I think one of Curt talked a lot about the factors that went into having a smoother process. The outstanding nominee, I think, first among them, the fact that the president was bold in saying, you know what, I have the right to nominate. We're nominating quickly. We want to fill this seat, and moving forward was very, very good in his strong response. I think also, though, a lot of the fact that they went crazy on her in 2017, right? Curt pointed out that. I think a lot of the reason that they were forced into having a more reasonable process than I think some of the Democrats wanted to have was because of overplaying their hand, not just in 2017, but also in the Kavanaugh nomination itself. America was so horrified by that. And I think Democrats, especially this close to an election, which it was close to an election there too, right? And in 2018, part of that craziness were people who thought that it was going to help, the Democrats that thought it would help them to be over the top. People like Senator Harris, who she wasn't running for office yet at the time, but she was using that as a platform to help catapult herself into a presidential campaign. And all of the people who were then in the process of running in the 2018 midterms, the Democrats had decided for the Kavanaugh confirmation, we need to push this, delay it as long as possible. They thought bringing it closer to the election was going to help them. It turned out the attack strategy, the smear campaign, the political, fight, rumble that was going on was not what America wanted to see. And people really responded to that in the exact opposite direction. So they overplayed their hand in a way that turned off a lot of Americans, that we've learned since then. And Molly and I learned this talking to some of the people that there's swing votes in there. It turned off swing votes. People they might have been able to appeal to, like the Susan Collinses of the world, were so outraged by this sitting on an allegation and then, later playing all of these games, the way the press was sandbagging these things and all this stuff, that actually hurt them. So what's so strange to me now is watching the fact that there are some on the left who seemed to think that more of the same would have been the solution for Amy Coney Barrett. And I think that is so bizarre. You've got the demand justice crowd, and shockingly, other people getting on this bandwagon saying, oh gosh, we've got to get rid of Senator Feinstein because she has committed outrageous acts of civility. She after what was truly a relatively civil hearing, no one was interrupting each other. It wasn't like the Kavanaugh confirmation. People are screaming and getting dragged out by the police. Or insofar as the senators during the Kavanaugh confirmation were interrupting each other and going crazy. They actually took turns. I think they said some stupid things. I think they asked questions that weren't relevant, but they were civil to each other. And the fact that Senator Feinstein acknowledged that and even gave Senator Chairman Graham a hug afterwards, which once upon a time would have been seen as the qualification for office, to be the ranking member of the committee and the chair of the committee. They need to be able to work together in order to conduct the nation's business, right? Wrong. According to a lot of Democrats, that actually is indication that she is somehow senile. The fact that she actually can get along with colleagues on the other side of the aisle, it is mind-blowing, the kind of stuff we're seeing. But I do think that what the way that the hearings went suggests that, in fact, most of her colleagues agree that trying to jump down the nominee's throat, trying to be explicit about anti-Catholicism, being explicit about attacks on her family is what they realized was going to look bad because it looked so atrocious when that same, overly civil senator did it the previous time. So I can't explain why Senator Feinstein has switched her technique so dramatically. Maybe they're right. Maybe she's changing in her old age. I don't know. But in the last 2 years. But at the end of the day, I think you could see that they recognized we have such an outstanding nominee here. Someone who is so smart, so on top of her game, answering questions. They didn't even bother really talking about the nominee in the hearing. In fact, the first day was so striking because I don't know if any of the Democrats even really mentioned anything about her or her record. The entire opening day of the hearing was them talking about the Affordable Care Act. So what the Democrats decided was going to be most to their benefit was not. So I guess what I'm saying is this is not them being civil for a change. This is them simply deciding it's going to be more beneficial for us to employ this in a different political way. They said, well, we don't have the votes to stop this nominee. There's no way she's screwing up this confirmation process. And she really didn't. She just knocked it out of the park. So they instead said, we're going to change the subject. So the entire hearing was a process of attempting to change the subject. Let's talk about Obamacare. Let's talk about, any other topic. Let's try to talk about, what do you think about global warming? What do you think about whether some of the questions for the record were inane, like are masks useful to prevent the spread of COVID? Are we interviewing a surgeon general? I mean, no, we're interviewing a Supreme Court justice. That's outside of their entire range of what they're supposed to be doing on the court. So it illustrated that the Democrats simply don't understand what a justice is about. They certainly don't know what confirmation hearings are about because they seem to use them as a get out the vote effort rather than talking to the nominee. If they really think the nominees aren't worth talking to, I would say, fine, let's get rid of the nomination hearings. They're not doing much good anyway. So fine, but they'd rather have the TV time. So they use that. And now what we're seeing is they know they can't defeat her, but what they're hoping to do is then use this confirmation process and shift it to their political benefit again. We've heard a lot of Democrats talking about how the process isn't working. The court isn't working. This court is broken. That's what some of the things that Biden is talking about. This is why we need the court system is broken. I would say, what if it's broken? What is it you think it's supposed to be doing? Because what I heard in this confirmation hearing was a judge who absolutely understood the role of the judiciary. She wants to look at the law. She wants to keep politics and policy as far away as possible from it. She wants to look at what the text of the Constitution says, what the original meaning is. That sounds to me like a judge, right? What they think is broken is a judge who is obeying the law. What they think apparently is the correct function of the courts are judges who are delivering liberal results day in and day out. That's what we used to have. We used to have a Supreme Court that was very reliable for frankly much of the last century in terms of delivering liberal results when they were not able to do so in the political process. So now they're very frustrated because somehow that has broken. Their liberal guaranteed super legislature that would be very effective when the law didn't necessarily say it or the Constitution didn't say it. We can get it done in the courts. Now they can't do that anymore. So I guess that's broken. Good riddance. But now the next step is, how can we then parlay this into changing the entire system? So if they can't win with the regular process, which is you wait for vacancies and you fill those vacancies, and in order to do so, you have to convince the American people that your vision for the judiciary is the right vision. I think we saw clearly in 2016, we've seen through this process as well, the American people actually want judges who are behaving like judges, who are behaving in a way that they look at the law and the Constitution and they respect the rule of law. Democrats don't want that, but they haven't been able to convince the American people of that, because every time that the issue is really on the ballot, we see people don't want politicians, they want judges. So now their next strategy is, how can we restructure, pack the courts? How can we do something else so that we can get some leg up politically to bring back the prior system that we used to have of judges doing the politics for us? I think that's really what we see now with this. With the next step here, the discussion of packing the court, the discussion where you've got Democrats trying to claim this process is somehow illegitimate. They know they can't attack Amy Coney Barrett of the substance because she's clearly outstanding, and a majority of Americans agree that she absolutely can be confirmed. She's qualified for the court. Really lopsided majority in terms of her support right now, and that's because she's just an excellent nominee. So instead, they're trying to shift the topic again. Instead of, they could change the topic to the ACA instead of the judge. Now they're trying to change the topic. Instead of making it about her, they're trying to create fake procedural issues that, and I'm happy to get into that if there are people who have questions, but all of them are completely, it's got like How to Lie with Statistics history version. It's How to Lie with history. They're saying, oh, well, we've never had a confirmation this close to an election, ignoring the fact that for the vast majority of our American history, the Senate hasn't been in session this close to an election. So of course there haven't. There have been judges put into office, but they've always been recess appointments. They couldn't be confirmed by a Senate that simply wasn't in session. So, it's just a sleight of hand they're trying to use to change the subject here. So I think, with that, we need to make sure that we are, again, as Curt said, it's not over till it's over. So everyone needs to kind of keep their radar up in case something crazy there's attempts to blow up. And we've seen some little inklings. The Democrats are smart enough that they don't do it themselves. They've been trying to get, or I don't know which way this flows, but the media has certainly been very effective at trying to bring up and to continue to prosecute effectively religious tests and attacks on Barrett's family, particularly her adopted children. And so we've seen some really ugly and strange bank shot kind of allegations going on in the media, but nothing that I think the Democrats have been foolish enough to try to take up themselves. So I don't think we rule out that something like that could happen, but I think the likely result is, thank goodness this has been a smooth process. We're going to have her confirmed on Monday. And then the next question is, how can we ensure that Democrats are not going to feel that they have, not to feel pushed by the extreme wing of their party to then have a take no prisoners approach to the courts more generally and decide that we need to just change and really blow up the whole system in order to achieve a political majority and to further politicize the Supreme Court. I think it needs to be equally, just as it was clear after the Kavanaugh nomination to Democrats, or it seems to have been, I hope it's clear, that type of smear campaign is actually going to hurt them and they shouldn't do it. We should make it equally clear that packing the court, that kind of politicization of the court, just as Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, just as even Bernie Sanders has said, bad idea, bad for the court, bad for the country. And I hope that will maybe help get them back from the brink of really undermining our third branch of government. So.
Thank you, Carrie. And Mike has some technical difficulties, doesn't have his camera, but he does have a great slideshow here. So instead of seeing Mike, you're going to see Mike's slideshow, which I'm sure is great. Mike, the floor is yours.
Okay, can everybody see my screen right now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm going to start off building off what Carrie just said. In addition to Democrats thinking they lost the Senate because of what they did in Kavanaugh, they went over the top. They thought they won the House because of health care. So that was the reason why the first day was just a healthcare hearing, because they think that's the key to them winning elections generally. So they were all about healthcare all the time, as it was more like a healthcare policy hearing, as both Curt and Carrie mentioned. But on the other side, I think it's important to show that person who, for those of you who don't know, is Senator Mike Braun. If it wasn't for the Kavanaugh hearings, it may have been Senator Donnelly from Indiana walking Judge Barrett into the hearing instead of Senator Braun. And every Democrat was well aware of that fact, that the reason why it was Senator Braun, probably more than any other race, was the Kavanaugh vote and their annex during Kavanaugh. So it really did help being this close to the election, because the Democrats were constantly reminded that they may be in the Senate majority right now if it wasn't for what they did in Kavanaugh. And on the flip side, they were in the majority in the House because of healthcare. At least that's what they think. I think it was for other reasons, but that's what they believe. Now, on the building on what Carrie said, Harris did kind of win the audition for vice president in the Kavanaugh hearings. The far left loved her extreme views. She was the hero of MSNBC. She was all over the place. They really loved the way she went after Kavanaugh and other nominees. On the other hand, during the Democrat primary, Amy Klobuchar took a lot of heat for being, quote, too nice to Trump's nominees. Most incredibly, she got heat for being too lawyer-like and not passionate enough. So if you watch the hearing, the one senator who had really a different attitude more than any other was Klobuchar, in the sense that Klobuchar was much more aggressive. The other senators were much more mellow. Klobuchar was more aggressive because she learned the lesson that if you want to go somewhere far in Democrat politics, you've got to be mean and vicious in this hearing. And as both Curt and Carrie touched on, Senator Feinstein was the opposite. She's going to pay a heavy price for that hug. She was not mean enough. She was not hard enough. And even in the hearing where they were trying to play it safe and they were more or less playing front defense, she is still a villain to the far left and is getting attacked everywhere. On the flip side, again, when you see what Senator Klobuchar is doing, that's what they want. That's what their base wants. An extreme example of the discipline was, of course, Senator Harris. Senator Harris was in the building, in the Senate, but she testified or questioned Judge Barrett via Zoom. Why was that? Well, they weren't going to risk any mistakes, any confrontation, any moments. She had a teleprompter and handlers in the room to watch over her. She was playing, like I said, prevent defense. For those of you who know football, that's where you're way back and not giving up any bad big plays. Her whole job was to not get in trouble. So they took it to the extreme there. And, to a certain extent, it worked in the sense that there was no Kavanaugh type moments. That was part of it. On the flip side, of course, I put out one of the more outrageous quotes, and there was a number of them from the far left. So we have discipline on the Democrat side, or the Democrats, I should say, have discipline right before an election. But if this hearing was taking place in January, I think it'd be more like what you see on the right there. They let the outside groups take the outrageous charges, where they stayed extremely mellow in the case of Harris, or too nice in the case of Feinstein. Now, there was some interesting sidelights here, and I do want to focus on part of this, because the most ridiculous moment in the hearing came with Webster's Dictionary and Senator Hirono when Judge Barrett talked about sexual preference. Webster's Dictionary redefined it. We lost that term, and you know what? That's fine. I mean, if we were fighting for that term, we weren't. I don't think that was an objectionable term or anything anybody thought about. On the other hand, there was a sort of a debate on originalism, and I think this was huge. Senator Durbin went after Judge Barrett for not being a true originalist or some such. I think this is a huge win for our side. Anytime we can get a Democrat senator talking about originalism, one, they look bad because they're idiots, and two, we look good because it legitimizes the philosophy. And Judge Barrett was an outstanding spokesman for originalism, and the fact that Durbin and other senators are trying to get her on that's great for us, great for the movement. Another thing the only thing I didn't think, big issue that Curt and Carrie did not touch on was recusal. The Democrats were asking her to recuse from ACA, and they're also asking her to recuse from election law cases. On both those matters, I think there's a much stronger case to get Justice Kagan to recuse. On the ACA, she was Obama's Solicitor General, and Judicial Watch and some other people have come up with emails that showed she did play some kind of advisory role in the passage of ACA. And I picked this picture with her circled in the corner there because, ironically, she was counsel to Senator Biden, Judiciary Chair. So unlike Amy Coney Barrett, who has never worked for President Trump, Justice Kagan was once an employee of Senator Biden. So I don't think it's a strong enough case to recuse, but whatever they're arguing, it's much stronger that Justice Kagan should not decide any ACA case or any election case. And Carrie touched on this briefly. I think one of the ways you can see where where Judge Barrett did a great job is the polling beforehand. There was some reluctance to confirm her. Now it's definitely in her favor to be confirmed. She did a great job in the hearing, and she was a great spokesman for originalism. I will say though, again, and this was what will drive the left in a non-election season, they made a lot of money off this. The fundraising went through the roof. I mean, Senator Graham's opponent has an obscene amount of money for a Democrat in South Carolina, and part of this was because of Senator Graham holding the hearings. I think the GOP Senate showed a lot of courage doing this in that sense, because the money is absolutely incredible that is flowing into Democrat candidates' coffers. So that's a sign the far left is very, very upset about this. But guess what? The middle and the right are very happy about it, or at least in favor of it. So again, we're winning in the polls, or Republicans and Judge Barrett is, but Democrats are winning in the money race. And it's ironic too, since Carrie's here, because Senator Whitehouse is obsessed with Carrie and dark money and always brings it up. Meanwhile, they are the ones making money off this. But this is a sign of things to come. They're going to go to court packing, as everybody touched on already. These people who are given all this money are not going to be content if Judge Barrett gets confirmed to end the fight. That's why Biden did not want to ever say anything on court packing, because he'd lose the far left. He tried to split the baby and come up with this commission idea. But the dirty secret is a third of Democrats oppose court packing. So they're not there yet. It's going to be the next big fight. If, I hope this doesn't happen. If Vice President Biden wins the election, they're going to talk about it heavily, but their own party isn't there. It's an extreme view, but there's a lot of money behind it, so they'll fight for it. That's all I got, and I want to turn it back to Ashley for questions.
To kick off the discussion section, why don't we go back a little bit to where Mike left off? What court packing proposals, regardless of whether or not they can pack the court. I mean, this is a lot easier said than done. It is actually very, very hard to add seats to the court. It does have some effect on the way that the outcomes of the case and the way that the justices rule. And historically, it's been used to actually change the outcome of the case more so than it has to, actually pack the court, because that's never really technically happened. What do you guys have to say kind of about those proposals and moving forward beyond, this confirmation, what the next fight will be?
Well, I mean, we use the term court packing generally, but of course there are a variety of proposals. I guess the most obvious one is they think that 2 seats were stolen. They think the Gorsuch seat was stolen because Garland was stopped, and they think that Barrett, when confirmed, that'll be a stolen seat. Of course, that makes no sense, because either you believe that it is okay under certain circumstances to confirm in an election year, or you don't. You can't have it. You can't have it both ways. I mean, you can distinguish, such as Republicans point out, that the rule depends on who controls the Senate, but the Democrats want to have it both ways on that. So it doesn't even make sense for them to say that there's 2 stolen seats, but they want to make up for that by adding at least 2 justices with a Democratic president and a Democratic senator to cancel out, in a sense, Gorsuch and Barrett. There were also other proposals, such as term limits. If you had term limits then of 18 years, then I guess if you do the math, that would roughly come out to every president getting to appoint a couple of Supreme Court justices. That's seen as fairer. I'm not sure that that's going to depoliticize things much, because 18 years is still a long time. But at least that might be less destructive to the court, in the sense that if you get into adding seats, and this is going to happen when the Republicans take control of the of government, they're going to add seats, and soon you're going to have 30 seats on the Supreme Court, and it's going to become a circus. And I think the court will have less legitimacy. And I think that's actually going to hurt the Democrats, because the Democrats, the progressives, have used the courts to their ends to override democracy. And if the court loses legitimacy to do that, I think progressives will in the long term regret it.
Ironically, if I can add really quickly, one of the senators who initially opposed it during the Democrat primary was Senator Sanders. He came out against court packing just for the reasons that you said, Curt, because everybody would keep adding seats to the Supreme Court, whether it was Republican or Democrat. I think it still is an extreme idea, and I think it's up to us and everybody else to fight and point out this is an extreme idea. You don't mess with something that's been around this long. So we got to fight against court packing every way we can, because, as you said, it'll change the Supreme Court from an independent body to a super legislature.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think some of the other proposals that are out there, term limits, all of those different type of things, interesting ideas, but practically speaking, all the big reform type things require a constitutional amendment. So is that something that's going to happen overnight? Probably not. What's really worrisome is this kind of part, and part of the reason they're not going to happen overnight too is they require a huge bipartisan majority. That's good. So you don't have someone putting in term limits to just help their party or the other party because they're hoping that these guys are going to get forced out first, or this person's going to win and then get more seats. That's actually what we want. So if we're going to have some way of changing it, it better be a way that we can do it so it doesn't have a partisan impact one party or the other. That's one of the big things about this court packing that's so shocking is they're not even attempting to make an argument like, oh, the justices are overworked, they need an extra person on the court, or, oh, it would be good to have a justice for every circuit. That's how it used to be. Sometimes they've added justices to keep up with the number of circuits. That would be at least kind of a neutral idea of, or at least even a neutral fig leaf. They're not even going for a fig leaf. They're just saying, we want to have more nominees in the court, period. And that's ridiculous.
Agreed. Since we have a lot of questions here, I'm going to kind of cut the discussion segment a little bit short, or just, introduce the questions here. First, we have one. Someone asked, where do things stand with lower court appointments and hearings? Are any seats currently open? I suppose that means other than the one that will be left by soon to be Justice Barrett.
I will say that Leader McConnell and President Trump have been phenomenal on judicial appointments, putting aside the Supreme Court, the circuit level, and the district level. Basically, they did a great job of leaving no vacancy behind. And despite what the left says, this was not a McConnell blocking Obama. Both President George W. Bush and President Obama did not put the priority that President Trump did on judges. So, and Leader McConnell and Chairman Grassley and Chairman Graham also did a good job. So if there are any ones left, I think they may try to move something during a lame duck if they can. But at this point, what is mostly left is district court nominations in blue states, which are those Democrat senators have said they don't want that filled because they're using the blue slip process, which basically says a home state senator can reject. It's a little more complicated than that, a nominee from their state for the district court. So bottom line, major kudos to President Trump for making judges a huge priority and not just the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I'll say the only appellate vacancy, I mean, up until Amy Coney Barrett, is presumed to be leaving her seat, we haven't had any appellate vacancies for a while now. This is amazing. I mean, it's prioritizing judges, and then it's like putting the correct emphasis on let's get the appellate nominees confirmed before you move on to the less important ones too. And then as Mike pointed out, the blue slip means that they can block these seats, even in places where there's incredibly need for another judge. They're willing to hold out hope that they'll be able to get Joe Biden to nominate someone more to their liking in a few months. So maybe, if we can win this election, then you might, with President Trump wins the election, you might see some of those the holds on the blue slips open up a little bit more. But right now, just FYI, there are, I think, 66 vacancies in district and lower courts around, and 41 of them have nominees. So there's a lot, most of them actually have nominees. And then there's this one vacancy for the Seventh Circuit that's anticipated when Barrett is confirmed at the Supreme Court. And that already has a nominee for it as well. So there actually is time to even get that seat filled before the end of the year. So that's, amazing speed and prioritization by the White House. And I know that the Senate Judiciary Committee is also ready to move on those nominees as well. We've already have over 218 nominees done this year. That's really an outstanding record for a mere 4-year term so far.
Yeah, among my Democratic friends, a lot of them complained bitterly about how many vacancies were open when Trump became president. Forgetting that a big part of that is because Obama did not make it the priority that Trump has made it.
So another question we have regarding, how things will play out over the weekend and through Monday. what is the whip count looking like right now? Might Murkowski, Collins, or Manchin vote for Barrett or abstain altogether? I know it's really hard to predict these things, but the extent to which you guys can weigh in, how do you think things will play out there?
Well, Murkowski and Collins both voted against moving to executive session to consider the nominee, I believe, which is not a great sign, right? And I think Collins has been pretty clear from the beginning that she would not vote for anyone before the election. I get her position that she has. I think Murkowski's a little less clear what she'll do, and whether either of them would vote against versus abstain, I think is another open question. That said, regardless, we have the votes for the confirmation either way. I don't know if Mike has any better ideas on the political side.
Yeah, no, I think it's every Republican is solid except for Collins, as she explained. Murkowski has wavered a little bit. She seems to buy the Democrat process argument. You shouldn't do it before the election, but neither one of those two have an objection to Barrett as the nomination. They have an objection to the timing, but every other Republican is solid. On the other side, Manchin, for example, who has voted sometimes, is agreeing with the process argument of the Democrats and not going there. So, if you want to have fun and try to lobby Murkowski, go for it. But I think it's pretty well set. I think all the Republicans are solid and all the Democrats are solid. And I think we pretty much know the vote total. It's how long it's going to take to get there.
And another question. So we saw a lot of procedural maneuvers on the floor today. Is there anything the Democrats can really do to delay proceedings without convincing a few more Republicans?
Short answer is no, but they can get sillier. They went to closed session, and the hardest part of going to closed session was getting the press out of the room, because closed session, there's no press allowed in. There's very limited staff, and there's certain rules. And as soon as they got in closed session, McConnell made a motion to end closed session, and they voted and ended it. I mean, that just shows you how ridiculous it's going right now. So they can do more stuff like that. That can take a little time, but as long as the Republicans stay there and 51 of them vote, it'll go. They can't stop it. And I should say kudos to senators like Tillis and Gardner in Colorado and those guys. I mean, they are in tough election fights, and they are staying there and they are voting. So I think we owe them a lot because it is hard on a Saturday and Sunday to stay in D.C. This close to an election, and they are doing it just because the silly antics that Senator Schumer. On the flip side, if you're Senator Peters, who is in a very tough race against John James in Michigan, you don't have to be there because it only takes a small number of Democrats to object. Why all the 51 Republicans have to be there to stop the stupidity.
If you're a Republican listening, thank your senators and thank the president. Because this has gone smoothly, I think we don't give them enough credit. We don't realize, as I said, that there might have been presidents who wouldn't have appointed someone or would have backed down under pressure. And there certainly were scenarios in which people like Romney were going to vote the wrong way and we wouldn't have enough votes. So the fact that it went smoothly, please don't lose sight of the fact that we need to thank the president and senators for how well it went.
Yeah, and Michael pointed out, if you want to lobby Collins and Murkowski harder, do it. I would say don't stop lobbying Manchin, and don't stop even if you've got Democrat senators. I would say lobby the heck out of them. What they're doing here is ridiculous. Some of these senators literally said 4 years ago that it is unconstitutional not to have a vote on a nominee. And now they're saying, well, because you guys didn't, we're not going to. Well, I'm sorry. If your argument was it's actually unconstitutional not to do it, you should do it, even if it's you shouldn't just quid pro quo because, be clear, it is not unconstitutional. That was a crazy argument. And it was embarrassing that even people like my former law professor, Liz Warren, were suggesting there was a constitutional duty to take a vote. That is ludicrous. But it's still, if you were making that argument 4 years ago, you can't just abandon it because, well, it's not fair because they did it. And so they are being incredibly hypocritical for people who thought that was who were claiming that was the standard. We know, and I think this is another example of where them overplaying their hand is making it easier for our guys to be strong on things like these procedural arguments. It is really clear that none of this procedural stuff is real. It is all of their arguments are completely opportunistic, and they're simply just making them because they're looking for some excuse to block or delay the nomination. It really has nothing to do with the actual timing of anything. What they don't want is Amy Coney Barrett replacing Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They don't want it today. They wouldn't want it in 2 months. They wouldn't want it 5 months ago. They wouldn't want it 5 years ago. That's what's really going on.
So speaking of which, someone asked the question, what about the Democratic senator from Alabama?
Now he's going for a position in Democratic administration. He's lost. He's given up. He isn't even trying to throw any bones to anybody. He came out right away. And I will add briefly the last question that Carrie said. Another key was Judge Barrett's performance. It was really phenomenal. I mean, it's hard to claim you're a Republican and vote against her. I mean, it should be hard to claim if you're a Democrat to vote against her, because she was amazing in the hearings. And we should never forget that she made this process easier on everyone on the Republican side.
I also wanted to point out that that progressives controlled the Supreme Court from roughly 1937 through the rest of the century. So what is that, 67 years plus? And yet during that time, Republican politicians, Republican scholars did not propose packing the court. So, there really is a difference between Republicans and Democrats here in terms of them looking at the court as something that should be principled versus something that should be a political football.
So before we have time for everyone to give, kind of a 30-second closing remark, I can't get into all the questions, unfortunately. I do have one question. It's kind of more of a point than a question that I want to get to because I think it's very important. It says, can part of the success of this project be because social and fiscal conservatives are working together on this nominee? Should we try to keep that coalition working well?
Yeah, it has been an amazing coalition, actually. And it's not just, I would say I'm used to working with a lot of different conservative libertarian groups that span all sorts of different issues. And we've seen an outstanding coordinated effort. Everyone, I think, is on the same page. I think what's interesting is some people even, there were some senators even suggesting, well, some of these judicial projects that we've seen, it's like, one nominee this is the chamber nominee versus the social conservative nominee. It doesn't have to be that way. This is, if you have someone who's a really solid nominee, this is someone who is everyone's not. I think everyone can recognize. And again, this goes to Michael saying, we thank the nominee for being so outstanding. I think she's someone who just, her approach to the Constitution is so principled that how can you not support her? But I think also it's a lot of those groups have jumped on because they recognize what's going on and see how critical all of these seats out and how important the Supreme Court is. So I think that's a really exciting development. And yes, the answer is easy. Yes, we definitely need to keep this this coordinated coalition moving forward so we can keep having great success in the courts.
And I think it's important.
Go ahead, Mike.
I think it's important it's after Kavanaugh because everybody remembers how terrible they were to Kavanaugh. And I think what we have to do as in the movement, we have to never forget Kavanaugh because Kavanaugh was basically a replay of Thomas. They are going to do this again to somebody. Right now it's fresh in everybody's mind, including the Democrats. But, if the Democrats have a really great election, which I don't think they will, but if they did, they'll forget all the lessons and they'll go for things just the way they used to. So we got to keep in mind and keep this going that Kavanaugh, Thomas will repeat. It's already happened twice. You can throw Bork in there too. So that's a good thing. It's a bad thing, obviously, but we can never forget that lesson. So it's great. Everybody's united. It was great. Everybody was so ready and on board, and we got to keep that going.
Yeah, I think it also helps. I was a little bit worried in June when conservatives were so disappointed by the results of this last Supreme Court term, certainly with Roberts, and at least on the gay rights case, Bostock, Gorsuch as well. I was worried that some people were even saying they were ready to give up on this whole effort to try to get a conservative majority on the Supreme Court. But in retrospect, I think that sharpened people's will. I think if there really was a conservative majority on the Supreme Court already, people wouldn't be as motivated. I think the fact that there's not, but that one more justice, hopefully Justice Barrett, will make a conservative majority. I think really motivated conservatives, libertarians, and, you know, helped to keep the coalition together and motivated.
Any closing thoughts here? We have about 3 minutes left.
I'll just start out because I want to make a point. If Judge Barrett is confirmed to become Justice Barrett, it is really a watershed moment, because in the lifetime of a lot of people, we had stealth nominees like Justice Souter. And now we have a nominee like Judge Barrett that is openly pro-life, that is not a stealth nominee. We know what she is like as a person. She's made clear that doesn't, you know, as a judge, she's an outright originalist too. There's no apologies for any of that. She defended the philosophy well. I think it's really a great moment for us as a movement and for the country to have that kind of thing going on versus where we were with, you know, Justice Souter. You know, we hope he's okay. We don't know if he's going to be okay. And he was actually okay for a year or two. And then he became, of course, one of the staunch liberals in the court. So we can never forget that, how important it is that we have an openly pro-life woman, a devout Catholic, who's going to be on the court.
Go ahead. I think.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree, and it's exciting as a woman to see someone who also it kind of indicating that when you saw her performance, it's clear this is not someone who was chosen because, oh, we need a woman. We just got to find someone to fill this, check this box. She was hands down one of the most impressive confirmation hearings I have ever seen. So it's exciting for me as a woman because I hate the idea of, much as Justice Thomas had the same experience of like, I don't want to be thought of as I'm someone who's here to check the box because I filled the right, you know, the right demographic. And she's not here to fill a demographic. She is just here to be the most incredibly boss nominee you can imagine. So that was really exciting for me. And it's a wonderful kind of capstone to this first term to have such an amazing nominee to be confirming here. So, you know, thanks to everyone on this call who was involved in any way you were able to support that, and looking forward to the confirmation on Monday.
The conservative women have every reason to be proud. This is really the first conservative woman that's going to be on the court. O'Connor was largely picked because of her gender and did not turn out to be conservative. And now one of people who may turn out to be one of the great conservative justices in history is a woman. And the only bad thing about it is I thought maybe Carrie would be our first conservative female justice, and now she'll have to be the second.
I don't know if we're ready for someone who's quite as loud and proud on her opinions, but you know, we'll see.
Thank you. I have to reiterate what Carrie said, and also, I mean, Judge Barrett's testimony was really the best that I've seen. I mean, Gorsuch was good. Gorsuch was smooth, but Barrett was, I mean, she was stellar. She was perfect. Like, all of her answers were just fantastic. I cannot say how impressed with her I really am, and really am excited to see her on the court. And I also would like to reiterate Curt's point too about call or write or however, and maybe your Republican senators, the president, and thank them for and encourage them about this process, because really we could not have done this without them and without them making this such a big priority. And thank you all for joining us today. Have a good weekend.
Thank you all.